Imagine this. You are 7. A rough hand closes around your wrist, and the doorway to your mother's house is no longer yours. From this night on, you belong not to a family, but to a city. The first lesson is simple and merciless. Comfort is treason. Weakness is contagious. And most of you will not live to see 30. Now look around you, here and now. Somewhere in Seattle, in Miami, in the soft glow of a hallway nightlight, your kids sleep on foam mattresses, their names stitched into backpacks, their lunches waiting in the fridge. Tomorrow you'll drive them to school, complain about traffic, and remind them to bring a jacket. A Spartan boy learned to sleep on bare ground, on a mat of reeds he had to cut with his own small hands. He learned to go hungry without complaint, to steal without being caught, to accept pain not as punishment, but as proof that he existed. This is not a legend polished by marble and memory. This is a training that shaved children down to the grain, until only the fiber of obedience remained. Tonight, we are stepping into that world, into the agoge, the iron school where boys were stripped of comfort, granted only hunger and order, dressed in a single cloak no matter the season, and taught that a shield was heavier with duty than with bronze. By the time we return, you'll understand why toughness, as you know it, would shatter there like fired clay dropped on stone, and why you would not last a season, perhaps not even a week. Listen closely. The city is quieting. Torches gutter in the wind that slides down from Tegetus, chill and clean, like a blade just lifted from water. Sandals scuff hard-packed earth. A drill master's voice travels low and even, the tone of someone for whom mercy is a myth. The air carries smoke from cooking fires, the faint tang of sweat and leather. A boy straightens under a weight too large for his shoulders. A shield edge catches a smear of moonlight. We are there beside him now, close enough to feel the sting in his lungs and the rough weave of his cloak. The night deepens. The training does not end. And so we begin. Evening settles over the valley where the Eurotas runs thin and dark, and the city of Sparta draws itself inward the way a fist closes around a hilt. Smoke from cook fires hangs low, sweet with olive wood and a little bitter where damp twigs resist the flame. It threads through the lanes, clinging to wool and skin, to the bronze rims of shields cooling against doorposts. The day's heat slides away from stone, and the air turns clean, edged with the faint iron scent that rises from hammered metal and hard-used earth. From a training yard comes the steady punctuation of wood against wood, shield rim against spear shaft. Not a clash. Not yet. More the practiced tap of rhythm finding itself. Sandals scuff. A boy's breath hitches and steadies. Somewhere, a drill master clicks his tongue, and the line adjusts by inches, the way a riverbank is shaped grain by grain. Beyond the walls, the Tegetus range exhales its mountain wind, a long, hollow tone that moves the dust and lifts the ends of red cloaks. It finds every corner of the settlement, the narrow alleys, the courtyards with their troughs and jars, the eaves where swallows have placed their nests. The smell of sweat lingers where the day labored hardest, salted, human, undeniable, braided with the buttery sharpness of fresh-pressed oil, the sour breath of fermenting wine, the warm promise of bread. Barley loaves, coarse and hearty, come out of clay ovens with crusts split by heat, and a woman's hand brushes the flour from the top before she sends a round to a neighbor's mess. The crumb is dense, a chew that asks something of the jaw. In another doorway, black broth steams in a low pot. Its briny tang drifts into the lane, mingling with char and herbs. A cedar chest creaks open, leather creaks too, a tired sound, and the smell of oiled straps blooms like a reminder. Tomorrow, the same work waits. Light arrives the ancient way, by being carried. Torches move along the streets like orange seeds in a dark pomegranate, each one with its smoke and murmured exchange. In open rooms, lamps glow on thick olive oil, their wicks trimmed close. The light is soft and a little sticky, gilding the edges of a shield, catching in the curl of a boy's hair, laying amber along a spear point left to rest against a wall. Moonlight has its own route, quieter, falling cold and silver where roofs break and colonnades tread across courtyards. It slides along the mountain flanks, down olive leaves turned pale in the breeze, and pools in the places not yet claimed by flame. Underfoot, the ground keeps its memory. The packed earth of the training ground is ridged with footprints. The stone floors of houses hold the day's chill. A palm laid to the floor would feel that coolness rise like a well. Cloaks scratch where they meet the neck. The weave is thick, practical, proud of its roughness. A shield, lifted, declares its weight at once, oak heart and bronze face, a round world that asks to be carried with both arms and all the back. The strap bites the forearm, not sharply, but with the steady insistence of a promise. I will ask more. You will give more. The city speaks in small, contained sounds. Laughter, not loud, but real, from a mess, as men pass a bowl, and a remark lands well. A reed pipe somewhere finds a marching measure, 2 notes, then a third that tethers them. A dog's single bark, and silence returning like a curtain eased shut. Chickens mutter themselves to sleep. A goat jostles its pen and settles. From the temple precinct, the smoke of an evening offering leans into the same wind that wrinkles the river's skin. Ash flecks lift and vanish. Someone rinses a blade. Someone knots a thong through a scabbard ring, testing it with a tug. Someone picks a splinter from a palm with a whisper of teeth. Faces pass within the torchlight, and then are gone, each marked by use rather than ornament. Hair is cut close. Beards are trimmed, not fussed. The red dye of cloaks has faded in the places the sun most loves. Shoulders, hems, the fold where a hand naturally rests. There are few trinkets, fewer soft edges. A lull spreads as meals finish and talk thins. Not silence, not yet, but the thoughtful quiet that comes when the day has paid out its rope and the knot for night is being tied. The boys of the agoge gather their mats of reed, cut as the law requires by their own hands, and lay them on stone that never fully warms. The reeds crackle faintly, a dry music. They share glances that have the fast brightness of the very young and the guarded look of those who count how many bruises are safe to show. The older youths check each other's posture without being told. A tap to a shoulder reminds a back to straighten. A small nod is a permission. A larger nod is a warning. The drill master watches and says little now. His voice, so sharp in daylight, has softened by degrees until it is only a presence that can be felt at the edges. Beyond the courtyards, fields breathe their own evening. The olive groves hold their smell even in darkness. Green and peppery, clean as cut grass, but older, more knowing. The soil is dark with long cultivation. The river lifts, sounds in pieces. A water bird starting up, a stone knocked loose by a drinking animal, the quiet slap of current against root. In the distance, a pair of travelers makes camp without a fire. Their murmurs drift and are absorbed by the half-sleep of the land. Stars prize themselves from the last light and arrange into the familiar patterns the city knows by heart. Everything here carries two weights, the weight of itself and the weight of expectation. A bowl is clay and also custom. A cloak is wool and also oath. A boy is a boy and also the city's next line. This double gravity presses without drama and without cease, and in the pressing, it shapes. It is not harsh tonight. It is simply present, a hand at the shoulder, firm, directing. The sounds thin further. The reed pipe fades, and in its place, the mountain wind resumes its patient thread, weaving through doorways and across thresholds, raising a few sparks from a hearth until they settle and darken. In a yard, a shield set against a wall slides a finger's breadth and stops, the tiniest metallic kiss marking its rest. Feet move less, voices lower, the city steps down through its own measures. What remains is breath, and the faint rasp of wool shifting over skin, and the even pulse of many small lives inside one idea. Night is not an end here, so much as a change of guard. The torches dwindle, and moonlight becomes the stricter light, making everything simple, unadorned. The bread scent lingers, now only a memory folded into the air. The sweat fades to salt on skin. The smoke thins to a suggestion. The city keeps its posture even in shadow. The training yard cools. The river keeps speaking in the same soft syllables. The mountain gives its slow blessing, a colder breeze, a quieter slope. And in this evening that deepens by increments, Sparta shows itself without speeches or banners, only textures, only weights, only the ordinary discipline of a place that believes a life is a craft. The day has done its chisel work. The night does its polishing. Little by little, edges soften, motion hushes, purpose remains, calm, exact, waiting for dawn. They took him at 7, as they took them all, and the road from his mother's door to the training yard felt longer than the whole world. His father walked beside him without touching, a red cloak folded over one forearm, the other hand empty. No one in Sparta made speeches at a moment like this. They had arranged their lives so the moment spoke for itself. Still, Nikiandros, a small boy with knees too knobby for pride, counted the steps the way he'd been taught to count sheep, as if numbers could make the leaving tidy. The building they entered was bare as a blade. A strip of light crossed the floor. Dust floated like quiet insects in it. A man with a voice like a tightening strap wrote his name, then said it back to him in a tone that made the syllables feel heavier than they had that morning. Nikiandros. Not Nika, the mother name. Not son, the house name. The city had a way of trimming words until they cut. His father handed over the cloak and a packet with a little bread, a twist of salt, and a thong of leather. He did not kneel to his son. He did not kiss the boy's head. He said, "I will see you at the mess when you've earned a place." It was both blessing and distance, the way Spartan blessings were. Then he added, almost as an afterthought carved from wood, "If you are beaten, you learn. If you are hungry, you learn faster." He turned to go, and Nikiandros' throat burned, the sudden heat of a cry one is not permitted to make. But his mother had said the last words he would be allowed to carry. Return with your shield, or on it. He clung to them as to a handle in a storm, not understanding, only knowing that they were weight and shape and must be held. At dusk, he lay on reeds he had cut himself, the edges like the memory of paper cuts against his calves. The cloak scratched at his neck as if to keep him awake and vigilant. Somewhere beyond the open door, men sang the low, steady songs that counted out the day's discipline. He put his palms on the stone floor, and felt the cool there, and then the warmth of his own skin returning to his hands. He told himself not to cry. The city did not hate tears. It simply had no use for them. The first weeks were a thinning of meals until hunger became a lens, thinning of sleep until mornings arrived with no surprise, thinning of speech until words were used as sparingly as oil. The boys learned from an IRN, an older youth, lean as wire, whose patience was a hard, exact thing. He corrected them with an open hand that landed like punctuation. Not cruel, simply final. Nikiandros learned how to lace his sandals so they would not fail, how to bind a cut with wool and spit, how to hold his body so it said, "I am not prey," even when he wished to be nothing at all. Hunger, he discovered, had a taste, metal and smoke, a sweetness at its edges like overripe fruit. At first, it frightened him. Then it became an animal he carried, that curled and uncurled inside him with its own rhythm. The city called it teacher. At night, boys whispered of the ones who had stolen a cheese from the altar and been whipped for being caught, not for stealing. The lesson impressed itself like a thumb in wax. Be clever, be quiet, be unseen. The gods honored obedience. The city honored results. He stole for the first time in his 8th winter. The air was thin as scraped bone. His breath made little clouds that broke and vanished. A farmer's shed held turnips, rough and clean-smelling, and a sack with a handful of walnuts. He thought of the iron's voice. If you are seen, you have failed. If you are heard, you have failed twice. And he moved like the shadow of a smaller boy. On the way back, feet in the dust, he passed an old helot sitting with his back to a wall, fingers blue with cold. The man looked at him and looked away, the way one looks away from a dog that is not one's own. Nikiandros's heart kicked against his ribs. He could have walked on. The lesson was to walk on. He broke the turnip in two and set half beside the man's hand without stopping. The iron caught him by the ear at the door of the mess anyway. Some lesson is always waiting. Why? The older youth said, not loudly. Nikiandros was tempted to answer with something quick and smart. But quickness was for when he ran or stole. In the quiet between them, there was another kind of courage. Because he looked colder than I was hungry, he said, and braced for the blow. It came. A flat sting across the shoulders. Not many. Enough to mark the line. After, when the white turned to red and then to heat, the iron surprised him by speaking in a tone that was almost human. Be certain, little reed. There are choices you make, and there are choices the city makes through you. If the city grows soft in you, you endanger the line next to you. Nikiandros turned the words on his tongue at night like a pebble. The city in me. He did not stop seeing the helot's thin hands. He did not share turnips again. At 10, he learned to read with a blunt stylus on a wax tablet. Not philosophy, not poetry, but laws and riddles, and the names of men who had died with their shields intact. The letters came to him like small soldiers, marched into ranks by rules. He liked the feeling of order. He liked, too, the way the reed pipe in the training yard made marching into music, and the way his feet learned to fall into place without thought, an obedience deeper than words. He was not brave by nature, only stubborn. This turned out to be enough. When they were told to wrestle, he closed around his opponent like a fishing net, yielding, then tightening as the other boy spent himself on force. He learned to listen through pain for the tiny changes that meant opportunity. When they were told to race, he did not win, but he placed well. When they were told to speak, he learned to choose one word where others chose three. "The Aaron like that. You waste nothing," he said once. And Nikiandros looked at his own hands and saw that it was true. The city had taught him how to make himself into a narrow tool. The altar of Orthia was a story before it was an experience. The older boys told it the way sailors tell of storms, with the half-pride of survivors. The cheese, the lashes, the line of watchers making a fence of bodies and expectation. When Nikiandros's time came, he did not think about the gods. He thought about the line, the boys behind him who would see his back, the Aaron who would not speak, but whose silence would be a verdict. He ran. The world narrowed to the bright rectangle of altar and shadow. The first lash landed across his shoulder blades with a sound like a flag in wind. He felt heat, then the strange clarity that comes when the body decides to go on because it cannot go back. He reached, missed, reached again. Fingers closing on the rind of the cheese, the second lash found his legs. His knee buckled. He would have fallen if a hand from someone he would never identify had not pressed, quick and firm, between his shoulder blades and set him upright again. He made it to the edge of the watchers and through. Nobody cheered. The Iron nodded once. That was how joy came here, small, as if not to startle anything that might take it away. Hunger returned the next day, as it always did. The body is not impressed by yesterday's courage. When Nikiandros was 12, his father saw him for the first time in 2 years across the room of the mess, where the smell of black broth was a second skin. He was leaner, harder, his eyes set deeper. But the father knew his son by the careful way he held his spoon, as if even at rest he calculated balance. They did not embrace. They shared a bowl. The older man asked no questions and answered none, which in Sparta was a form of conversation. As they rose, the father rested 2 fingers briefly on Nikiandros's shoulder. The touch lasted less than a heartbeat. The boy walked away taller by a hand's breadth. At 15, the world of boys and men touched and sparked. He began to watch the way older soldiers moved their weight, how they held silence like a weapon. He learned the names of the men who had not returned from campaigns and what it meant to carry a shield as a promise and a threat. He learned to run at night without tripping over the ground he could not see, to follow the river by its sound, to read clouds for weather the way one reads faces for deception. He learned to say nothing when asked about the crypteia, the shadow work some boys were tasked with, testing themselves against fear and against the people who lived beneath Spartan rule. He learned the ground between mercy and order and how it shifted underfoot like sand. It was then that the city asked for more of him than effort. It asked for judgment. During a ration lean week, the boys were sent to forage, which meant finding food that did not belong to them and not being caught. He slipped into a yard where figs hung hard and green, months from sweetness. He knew better than to waste time there. In a shed, he found dried fish wrapped in woven rush. He took 2, then replaced the cover as exact as he had found it. On his way out, he saw a girl about his sister's age, if he still had a sister, watching him through the gap in a door. A helot's child, barefooted, eyes the color of wet bark. She said nothing. He raised a finger to his lips. She hesitated, then nodded once. He left her nothing. He left her everything. the knowledge that he could be a danger to her family. Later, lying on reeds, he imagined her telling. Imagined the man who owned the fish counting and counting again. Imagined the whip, the half-starved dog used to encourage truth. He had made a choice that kept him fed and kept her family in jeopardy. It settled in him like a stone that would not pass. When he ate, he chewed carefully, as if the fish would betray him by a louder swallow. The next day, he saw her again in the lane, carrying a jar too heavy for one hand. He did not look at her. He was learning that compassion must be invisible if it hoped to survive here. But as he passed, he lifted the other side of the jar by its cord and took 10 steps with her. No words, no nod. When he let go, his hand tingled with the even burn of weight suddenly gone, and there was no lesson in it, no whip, no praise, only the knowledge that he could place one thing down without breaking another. This, too, the city had taught him. Small mercies could be fit into the gaps between orders if one learned their shape. At 17, the agoge let its teeth sink in a last time. He and the other near men ate less and trained more. They were given one cloak for winter and expected to come home with it in summer still. They were sent to sleep where they could not be found. They became lean as knives left too long on the grindstone. He noticed in himself a new quiet, not the silence of fear, not the silence of obedience, but a space in which choice could echo before it struck. In that space lived dilemmas with no good edge to grasp. If he spared a boy a beating by taking blame, did he weaken his friend or strengthen the line? If he corrected a younger one harshly, did he honor the city or his pride? If a helot looked at him with a question in his eyes, was it an invitation to cruelty or to restraint? One night, under a moon like a clean coin, he and his cohort were told to hold a shallow ravine against a surprise attack from the older youths. No torches, no shouting, only the geography and their ears. He placed his 10 boys along the curve, measuring by breath. By the way the ground broke sound into hints. He told the smallest boy to stand 2 paces behind him and not to move, not for anything. The attack came not as a rush, but as a pressure, a weight applied in 3 places at once, clever, disciplined, familiar. He felt his line flex, then settle. He moved along it like the shuttle of a loom, weaving steadiness where it thinned. A shape larger than the others came at his right. He lowered his shoulder and met it. They went together to the ground, but he had known where the stones lay, and the other had not. He used that knowing. When the older youths retreated, their drill master's laughter carried, not mockery, not praise, but recognition. After, the small boy behind him vomited quietly into his hands. Nikiandros kept his own face still. In the morning, the Iron said to him, "You found the speed of the night." It was the finest thing anyone had said to him. Adulthood in Sparta did not arrive with a feast. It arrived with membership in a mess. He was elected, which meant enough men thought he would carry his share of food, words, and danger. He sat down among them, his cloak still stiff with the smell of dye, and took the bowl that circled from hand to hand. One of the elders, a man whose beard had more gray than red, watched him with an expression that had almost become gentleness, but stopped short. "Who is the bravest man?" he asked, for the sake of hearing how the young answered. The wrong answer here was vanity and also false modesty. Nikiandros said, "The one who fears losing his place in the line more than he fears death." The elder's mouth bent. "And who is the weakest?" the one who fears being seen as weak. The elder's eyes flickered, then he passed the bowl. Soldiering began where training left off, which is to say, at the edge of thought. It had more march in it than glory, more waiting than fury. He learned the geography of other men's lands by his calves and arches. He learned that the field before a battle sounds like an argument between birds. He learned that the bronze face of a shield throws back a little of the world at whoever looks. He learned that a phalanx is a language, a sentence made by bodies deciding, all together, to move as if one thought ran through them. The first time he stood with his left hand in the rim of a neighbor's shield and felt his own rim taken up on the other side, he understood the city's most intimate invention, the self made useful by being partly given away. In that first standing, he met an old fear and found it had changed flavor. As a boy, he had feared the blow and the shame that followed. As a man, he feared leaving a hole where he had been, an absence that would let a spear through and make a ruin of the neat grammar of the line. The fear steadied him. When the command sounded and the ground at their feet became a drum, his body moved with indecision as if it had been born there. The press of shields became the world. Breath shortened to a workable size. Sight narrowed to edges and chances. Somewhere a man screamed high and then was pulled down, the note cut clean. Nikiandros kept his feet under him, his spear where it could find work, his shield where it could make promises true. When it was over, the world had its colors again, and there were men on the ground, and no speeches, and the smallest of nods from the captain who counted them. He felt no triumph, only alignment. He had done what his shape had been carved to do. Not all tests wear bronze. Between campaigns, the city asked him to instruct younger boys, the same thin, sharp hopes that he had once been. He found in himself a string he had not known he possessed, a kind of gentleness that did not cancel hardness, but held it true. When a boy lied to him about a stolen loaf and hid his empty hands badly, Nikiandros remembered the Helot girl with the jar. He punished the boy with runs and drills until sweat made a second cloak on him. Then he said, "Next time, better theft or better truth." The boy looked at him as if he had invented a third way where only two had been. The city was in him now, yes, but there were corners where something else had taken hold. A private accounting he kept alongside the public ledger. He checked it when he refused to mock a boy with a stutter, when he set aside a slice of bread for an Aaron who had gone without so the boys could eat, when he kept a story of his mother to himself rather than spend it for a laugh at mess. He did not know if this made him weak in the city's eyes. He hoped it made him stronger where eyes could not reach. His father aged like a well-used spear. Fewer nicks than one might expect. More polish. They met sometimes at the river, where men washed the dust from their legs, and they spoke of the kind of things Spartans admitted existed: weather, duty, the state of leather. One evening, as the water slurred over stones, and the sun lit a path across the Eurotas that no one could walk, the older man said, "Your mother is pleased." It was a sentence he had not earned and could never repay. He only nodded because the alternative would have outpaced speech. The dilemma that had stalked him since the halved turnip arrived again, sharpened when the city prepared the youths for the Cryptia. He was not chosen to join the stalkers. He was relieved and ashamed, an untidy pairing. A boy he had trained with was chosen and did not return with quite the same eyes. The city called it necessary. The elder called it weeding. The helots called it what it was, in words that did not reach the mess halls. Nikiandros found himself between the city and its shadow, and, for the first time, could not make the two fit. On those nights, he walked to the edge of the olive groves and let the trees do the thinking men were forbidden. The leaves made their small, constant music. He came back with nothing solved and everything decided. He would do what the line asked, and he would be meticulous in what he took from those who could not refuse. That meticulousness became his act of resistance. He took less than he could. He returned what he could not take lightly. At 20, the city named him a man. The word felt both too big and exact. He woke before dawn, out of habit, and found that he was not afraid, not of blows, not of hunger. He feared failing the shape he had made. He feared, in a quiet, private way, becoming the sort of man who needed to prove he was a man. He did what Spartans do with fear. He put it to work, letting it make his steps precise and his judgments weighed. On a spring morning, when the river ran quick and cold, he went to the training ground alone. He lifted his shield. The bronze caught a pale sun and threw it back, a dull gold that made even the ordinary dust handsome. He felt the weight on his forearm as a familiar argument and a vow. He set his stance, the one the iron had corrected 100 times, and practiced the short thrust that saves breath for the next one. The air smelled of new grass and old sweat, of leather warming in light. He remembered his first night on reeds, the ache in his throat, the cool of his palms against stone. He remembered the helot's blue fingers. He remembered the cheese and the lash, the hand that steadied him, the small boy vomiting behind him, the elder's questions, his father's 2 fingers resting like approval, the girl with the jar. He arranged these memories without ornament, as a man arranges his kit before he leaves, each in its place, each useful. He was Nikiandros, son of a soldier, student of hunger, keeper of a few stubborn mercies. He had been thinned and edged and shaped by a city that believed a life was a craft. He had become what he could within that shaping. A blade, yes, but also the hand that knows when not to use it. And in the long twilight between boy and man, he had learned the hardest Spartan lesson, the one no one spoke because it betrayed nothing and confessed everything, that obedience and compassion are not enemies if one holds them with enough strength. He did not know if the city would agree. The city did not need to. He would stand in the line and carry his shield and return with it or on it, and in the narrow spaces the day left him, he would put down weight where he could, so the world did not bruise as easily against his passing. When the sun slid higher, boys arrived in a shuffle of sandals and laughter they tried to swallow. Nikiandros set down his shield and picked up the reed pipe. He played the marching measure his own iron had favored. 2 notes, then a third that tied them together. The boys fell into step, the dust lifting in soft spirals around their ankles. He did not speak over the music. He did not need to. The city's lessons lived in their feet now. His own lesson lived in the way he kept time, steady, exact, allowing breath between phrases so that strength could find itself. He watched them move and thought, not without tenderness, little reeds. We will make you into arrows. We will try not to waste the wood. The agoge was not a school, so much as a citywide decision about what a human life should be shaped into. Imagine the Eurotas Valley as a long workbench. Spartan boys were the wood laid on it. The tools were hunger, cold, rhythm, and the gaze of other Spartans. From the age of 7 until they were permitted to call themselves men, the boys lived inside an architecture of discipline, whose rooms were narrow on purpose. It taught them to live with less, to speak with less, to desire less, or at least to desire the right things, in the right measure, at the right time. At the center of this architecture stood the paidonomos, the magistrate charged with herding boys. He set the measures. Others kept the beat. Each troop, an agile, formed under the eye of an iron, an older youth chosen for the carefulness of his cruelty, the kind that corrects without wasting anger. An iron was both wall and doorway. He was the hand that placed a boy back into the right stance, the ear that noticed when a breath came ragged, the voice that asked questions that had only one acceptable length of answer. He supervised meals, marches, punishments, and the small economy of favors that grew in any group of boys forced into daily friction. Days began when the light had not yet divided the ridge from the sky. Feet learned the valley by feel, where the ground pressed back fast, where it gave in dust, where the river's gloss meant slickness. The first work was always the body brought into line, running, wrestling, throwing, jumping, not because victory in games would be celebrated, but because the body that could be trusted under strain would not endanger the line later. Cold served as teacher and examiner. A single cloak, winter through summer, rubbed the neck raw and taught a boy that comfort could be earned but not expected. The boys took cold like medicine. They took hunger the same way. Food came in a quantity designed to sharpen rather than satisfy. The official story was that the city provided less, so the boys would be forced to steal and so learn stealth. The unofficial truth was simpler. Scarcity is an efficient chisel. The rule was paradoxical and exact. Steal what you can. Be beaten if you are caught, not for theft, but for clumsiness. In this way, the agoge taught both initiative and secrecy, lashing them together until they could not be teased apart. A boy who learned to approach a henhouse without waking the dog learned, without anyone saying so, how to approach an enemy shield line without inviting a spear. Language itself was rationed. Laconic speech was not an affectation, but a discipline. Words were sanded until only the essential grain remained. The iron asked, "How many in your mess?" And the correct answer was not a number, but enough. A boy who boasted learned soon enough that precision mattered more than noise. Still, among themselves, boys invented 1,000 quiet dialects, the click of a tongue shared among friends, the lift of an eyebrow that meant move, the silence that said, "I saw you help him, and I will not say your name." Inside that economy, virtues and vices often wore the same mask. Friendship could be the reason a boy slipped a crust of bread to another, and it could be the reason he refused to do so. To toughen him, he would say, to keep him ready, to honor the city which expected more of them than fondness. Betrayal hid in the same shadows as loyalty. When an Iren devised a contest, who could reach the river and return with a stone from its bed without being seen, boys learned not just stealth, but the taxonomy of trust. If one of them accidentally took too long to tie his sandals, buying time for a friend to slip across the lane, was it kindness or sabotage? If a boy yanked another behind a wall a breath before a drill master turned a corner, was it mercy or a future debt? They did not have words for these calculations, but they did the math all the same. Games were not games in the modern sense. They were rehearsals with sharper edges, A mock hunt might set one half of the troop to stalk the other through olive groves at dusk. Silence required, failure obvious and bruising. A debate might be a sequence of riddles and proverbs answered with the kind of wit that does not draw attention to the speaker, because attention here could be as dangerous as a misstep. The famous contest at the altar of Orthia, snatching a cheese under the lash, was less about spectacle than orthodoxy. The boy who bled and did not break demonstrated that the body's demand for avoidance could be negotiated down. Those who watched learned two lessons at once. Endurance is admired. Those who bleed for admiration are useful. The older youths tested the younger with set pieces and with improvisations. An Iron might have a boy stand in the midday sun and recite the names of those who died with their shields, while other boys whispered distractions, jokes, jabs, remembered comforts. If the name list stuttered, the failure was communal. The troop bore the consequence. In that way, the group learned to braid itself tighter, to keep each strand smooth. The Iron rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. In a culture where shame was a public currency, a quiet "again" could weigh more than any blow. Elders visited, men with campaign scars mapped over their knuckles, and the kind of stillness that comes from years of holding one corner of a common weight. They did not tell war stories for entertainment. They told them to install habits. Keep your left up. The man beside you is a promise. Do not make him a liar. Thirst can be walked through. Panic cannot. Spear straight. Mind straight. In Sparta, virtues were taught as actions first, meanings later. A boy learned obedience by setting his cloak exactly as instructed for a month. Only much later did he understand that the point was not the cloak, but the postural instinct it trained. The city's cult of the state sat behind these lessons like a mountain that never moved. The gods had their altars, yes. Artemis Orthia had her rites. The twin kings had their sacrifices. But the most demanding altar stood invisible, the altar of the city itself. Parents lent their children to that altar and did not ask for gentle treatment. Return with your shield, or on it, mothers said, not because they lacked tenderness, but because tenderness, here, wore a different uniform. It was cruel to let a son live badly, kinder to demand he live as the city required or not at all. Weakness was not simply disfavored, it was treated as contagious. A limp would be corrected with extra weight, not pity. A stutter would be sanded with practice and humiliation until the words came clean, or the boy learned to say less and make it sharp. In the mess halls, Syssitia, boys watched men practice the adult social art. To be vigorous without noise, proud without display, humorous without softness. The black broth, salted, pungent, more fuel than feast, nourished bodies, and the idea that pleasure is safest when it is simple. Meat was rare, wine was watered, conversations were scissors that cut fluff away. Questions came with barbs. What is courage? Not running when you want to. What is the measure of a man? The space he denies fear. Riddles and sparring paired until the habits synchronized. Think fast, move small, do not overreach. Boys learned by proximity, absorbing the stance and sentence length of men who were held up as proofs of the system's success. Women, too, belonged to the city, though differently. Spartan girls trained their bodies. Spartan women ran households. Spartan mothers owned land and commanded servants with a clarity that matched their husbands' brevity. They were not cloistered. They were not mute. Their tongues were trained weapons. A boy who slouched might find himself corrected by a woman crossing a courtyard with an amphora balanced on her head. "Your line will not forgive your spine for that," she would say. And he would straighten, not because he feared her, but because Spartan women had earned the right to demand of men with the same economy the men used among themselves. "With your shield or on it," came from their mouths first, and no boy mistook it for theater. The city's severity found its echo, and its counterpoint in them, the source of the life that Sparta insisted belonged to more than the private home. Beneath all this, under the training yards, under the mess halls, under the syllables of laconic wit, lived the helots. They farmed the valley and made Spartan time possible. If the boys' mornings were free for running and wrestling, it was because helot hands had turned the soil before dawn. Their labor lined up the city's hours. Their fear padded its demands. The relationship was braided with surveillance. Boys in the agoge learned to look through helots as if they were part of the land, and also to look at them hard when the city required it. There were rituals of humiliation the elders insisted on, demonstrations to teach the lesson that Spartans were set apart. Stories said helots were forced to drink to stupor so boys could see what lack of discipline made of a man. Other stories said the real intoxication was the boys' relief that they were not permitted such loosening. The cryptia, the secret stalking, belonged to this shadow curriculum. Selected youths were sent into the countryside with knives and instructions that were both precise and vague. They learned the geography of fear and the arithmetic of dominance. Some did not like what the lessons demanded. Some liked it too much. The city said it was necessary, that to keep a people subservient required a little darkness spread in many small places. The agoge did not debate morality. It measured usefulness. Still, in mess whispers and in the quiet of olive groves, boys like Nikiandros felt pressure on the seam between order and cruelty. The state had a long memory and a short temper. The question that could not be asked in public found private answers in the choices boys made when no Iren stood watching. Among peers, affection and rivalry wore identical cloaks. Boys ate from the same bowls, slept within reach of the same size, and learned each other's knees and tempers as if they were learning a terrain map. Bonds formed that could survive hunger, lashes, and winter. But those bonds were not gentle. A friend might share a stolen fig and, in the same hour, shove you into a wall because your elbow drifted during drill, and endangering the line was unforgivable. A boy who cried too easily found kindness in the form of a brutal joke told early and often enough that he learned to stiffen. A boy who cheated at a game by claiming a point he had not earned might sleep with his mat wordlessly moved away by an arm's length, a distance as painful as a bruise. Small economies of reputation emerged. Who could be trusted to keep a secret? Who would break when pressure rose? Who could make a joke that did not cut too deep? Who could take one and hold his eyes steady? Zrata, betrayal, came most often in the form of compliance. A boy currying favor with an Iren would echo his harshness too exactly, like a bad performer, and boys would mark him as unsteady, overcompensating. Another might try a softness that read as softness and be corrected into alignment by a public, creative punishment. Running the perimeter with a mouthful of water he was not allowed to swallow, to prove that control could be measured. The worst betrayal was not of a friend, but of the line. A boy who broke formation under pressure to save his own skin learned that skin could be lived without. He might not be told this directly. He would simply find the city had fewer places for him to fit, and the cold found more of him at night. Mentors were not always assigned. Often, they happened the way shade happens near a wall. A veteran might notice a boy's careful hands, the way he folded his cloak, as if the act mattered as much as the cloak. He would stand near him at mess, correct the angle of his grip on a spoon, ask a problem in a tone that required the answer to be quick but not flashy. He would take the boy to the training ground and show him how to move on gravel so the stones did not tell on him. In that contact lived an education beyond drills. What dignity looks like when no one is watching. How to hold grief without letting it slouch your shoulders. How to laugh short and true. Some bonds deepened into attachments the city both used and policed. The older man might give the younger a gift, a knife, a word of praise, a story. The younger gave back attention and effort. If the line made men into one instrument, these narrower ties tuned individual strings. Rites made the year into a necklace of tests. There were sacrifices before campaigns, coppery blood, animal breath, the priest's quick hands. There were processions where boys carried branches and sang meters that had survived longer than any single man. There were festivals in which women danced and shouted the kind of praise that makes men stand straighter, and the kind of insults that make them want to deserve better words next time. The city choreographed these things to make belonging a rhythm that ran deeper than argument. If a boy doubted, the drum of custom gave his feet something to do until his mind fell in. Underneath, the law ran clear and cold. 2 kings, a council of elders, 5 ephors with faces like door lintels. These shapes enclosed the agoge, the way a jar encloses oil. Foreigners were watched and sometimes dismissed, xenolasia, because new words bring new ideas, and ideas have a way of lowering shields at the wrong moment. Property existed, but not as a private universe. Wealth was suspect unless it could be made to bow to the city's needs. Boys learned early that anything beautiful about them, from a deft mind to fast legs, was to be consumed for Sparta. A lesser city might have told them they were special. Sparta told them they were necessary. The helots remained the largest silence. In harvest time, boys saw lines of them bent under sacks, backs shining with sweat, faces turned away. They were counted, punished, used. Yet in that shadow side of the city, life went on. Songs were sung out of the hearing of Spartan ears. Marriages made, children born, jokes traded with the same sharpness that kept the oppressors clever. The boys sensed a counterworld running parallel to theirs, a river under their river. Some, like Nikiandros, learned the art of moving lightly when that world came near, taking less than they could, speaking in a way that did not add insult to injury. Others did not, could not, because the city had convinced them that mercy was an extravagance the line could not afford. In this social climate, weakness had 1,000 definitions and only one cure: being made useful. A boy with a limp might be given tasks that built him somewhere else until the limp's meaning faded. A boy who loved words too much was assigned to memorization that made the love pay rent. A boy who hated the cold was sent to carry water at dawn until his hatred had nothing to feed on. The city prided itself on this transmutation. It did not ask who you wanted to be. It arranged circumstances so that you became what it required. For Nikiandros, the agoge wrote its lines across years, the reeds under his first night, the lash at Orthia's altar, the small boy who retched into his hands after the night ravine drill, the elder's questions clipped short, the helot girl balancing a jar heavier than her hope. Inside those lines grew a sense that did not contradict the city so much as qualify it. The line was real. Duty was real. The shield's rim belonged in the next man's hand. But facing the helot in winter with blue fingers was also real. The way an Aaron's voice softened after a punishment had landed and been endured was real. The way a Spartan woman's correction could hold both scorn and care was real. He learned to live within the city's absolutes by tucking small, human exceptions into the seams and pressing them flat. They did not undermine the wall. They made it less likely to crack. By the time he stood among men and ate the black broth as one who had earned his place at the bowl, Nikiandros knew what the agoge had wanted him to know. That he was a part, not a whole, a syllable in a longer word, a single bronze scale in a shield that had to hold. He also knew what it had not intended to teach him, but had taught him anyway, that a city is a machine made of people, and machines run best when the moving parts are tended, not merely used. He would carry his shield. He would keep time with the reed pipe. He would demand of boys what had been demanded of him. And in the quiet after drills, when the valley smelled of warm bread and iron and olive leaves, he would let a small mercy survive the day and ask nothing of it but that it keep breathing. This was the social weather of Sparta, a permanent high pressure that kept skies clear and storms contained, a wind that blew steadiness through men until steadiness felt like air. Friendship grew there, and envy. Loyalty hardened there, and the kind of betrayal that looks like overzealousness. The older men stood like pillars, not showy, but load-bearing. Women's voices crossed the courtyards like thrown ropes that drew boys upright. The helots worked in the fields that kept the boys fed enough to be hungry. Ceremony stitched the weeks together. Silence did its slow sculpting. And the agoge continued, patient and exact, making of boys not heroes. Sparta distrusted heroes, but instruments, useful ones, tuned, ready for a hand to pick them up and set the rhythm marching. Step back from one boy's breath in the training yard and see the wider sentence Sparta wrote across Greek history. A phalanx, after all, is a kind of grammar, shields joined into clauses, spears into verbs, feet into meter. Sparta's army did not merely win fights. It taught the peninsula what could be done when a citizenry accepted the discipline of moving as one thought. That lesson, hammered into bodies beside the Eurotas, traveled, in rumor, in fear, in imitation, until it became part of how Greece imagined strength. Sparta's early power formed on land, not sea. Where other polis traded and argued, Sparta settled into its valley and made certainty out of proximity. The men who farmed the soil were compelled to farm it. The men who fought learned to do so without flourish. From that foundation grew the Peloponnesian League, a net of alliances tied to Spartan leadership, practical rather than glamorous, conservative rather than innovative. The League did not shine like Athens' empire. It held like a well-made yoke. When trouble gathered, cities south of the Isthmus looked to Sparta with the expectation one reserves for granite, not warm, not charming, but bearing weight. In the Persian Wars, Sparta's fame took on a dimension it would never quite lose. The aura of the necessary stand. The narrow pass at Thermopylae became a theater of proportionality. Few against many, order against flood. The Spartans and their allies died there, and in dying, they published a manual. Choke the enemy's advantages. Force the fight into the width of your shield. Later, at Plataea, under Spartan command, Greek hoplites met Persian infantry in a contest remembered less for pageantry than for the hard fact that trained bodies in formation could pry victory from numbers and noise. Sparta was not the only author of these moments, but it supplied the tone, the refusal to improvise when improvisation would prove expensive. Against that tone stood Athens, quick-minded, sea-boned, open to novelty. If Sparta was a training ground turned into a city, Athens was a conversation that built itself into walls. Athens' strength grew from ships and silver, from a citizenry that became sailors and orators, from a democracy that delighted in hearing itself think aloud. Where the Spartan shield line carried law into battle, Athenian triremes carried law across water. Fast, versatile, noisy with oars and argument. The Peloponnesian War read, in one telling, like a contest between styles of courage, the patience of those who hold ground versus the audacity of those who cut wakes. Sparta could not match Athenian theater or philosophy any more than Athens could match Spartan silence. Each city suspected the other of mistaking shine for substance. In time, both would be right and wrong. Corinth, perched at the neck of Greece, played yet another part. Mercantile, pragmatic, jealous of its roots. Corinth fought with hoplites too, and traded in every useful direction. It had no appetite for grand designs, so much as for profitable stability. Corinthian support often tipped coalitions. Corinthian opposition could foul the water for everyone. In the Peloponnesian War, Corinth's grievance against Athenian empire helped push Sparta from reluctance to decision. Later, when Spartan hegemony turned sharp, Corinth recoiled and helped finance resistance. If Sparta was the weight and Athens the speed, Corinth was the leverage, smaller in reputation, crucial in effect. Sparta's victory in the Peloponnesian War revealed as much as it resolved. The city had learned to endure. Now it had to govern. Through admirals like Lysander, who built a navy with Persian gold and ruthlessness, Sparta installed garrisons and compliant regimes across a humbled map. The word that follows such power is order, and for a season, Sparta supplied it with the same chill efficiency it applied at home. But order that travels tends to fray. Allies became dependents, then resentful. Persians reclaimed their price with interest. Spartan commanders abroad learned the temptations of distant authority. Athens, broken and then breathing again, looked up from its ashes with ideas sharper than spears. The Thebans, taught by hardship and brilliance, waited their turn. It came at Leuctra in 371 BCE, where Theban generals, Epaminondas foremost, reimagined the grammar of the line. To meet Sparta's veteran right wing, Thebes stacked its own left deep, drove at a slant, and snapped the hinge. The battle did not merely defeat a Spartan army. It cracked the story of inevitability that had marched ahead of them for a century. In its wake, Messenia, the land whose people had been helots for generations, was wrested free. For a city built on a bedrock of coerced labor and a narrow citizen body, the loss was not another bad season. It was the end of a particular possible future. Sparta did not vanish. It tightened. It remembered itself. It persisted in diminished form. But the spell was broken. The rest of Greece learned that even the most disciplined line bends under a smarter idea. And yet, the Spartan line refused to leave the imagination. Romans, who loved order and profit in equal measure, found in Sparta's severe myths something to polish and display. Plutarch, writing much later, told lives of Spartan kings and lawgivers in a style that made austerity a virtue the civilized man might rehearse on comfortable evenings. Lycurgus, half man, half legend, became the name one gave to the idea that a city could choose hardness and be ennobled by it. Roman boys read of laconic speech and short rations and learned to admire what they did not strictly have to attempt. Admiration from a distance is often inexpensive. In early modern Europe, as kingdoms centralized and armies professionalized, Sparta became a mirror in which reformers saw what they wanted to see. Some admired the frugality, the public spiritedness, the promise that a citizen could be built like a bridge for the common crossing. Others took the darker cues, eugenic myths, the policing of subject peoples, the educational cruelty made to look like medicine, and dressed them in the language of improvement. Enlightenment writers praise Spartan simplicity as tonic against the luxury that, in their view, made nations soft. The 19th century, with its drill fields and school prefects, borrowed a Spartan mood. Don't complain, keep time, win by steadiness. The Prussian army's obsession with drill and the British public schools' cult of games both carried a Spartan echo. The belief that character can be trained into a dependable unit by repeated collective strain. The 20th century amplified the echo and split it. Totalizing states pointed to Sparta as precedent for the subordination of the individual to a national cause. Fitness cults and schoolmasters, and, later, sports brands used Spartan as shorthand for the clean virtue of doing hard things together. In both cases, the helots were left out of the brochure. The cost was edited away. A modern marathon marketed as Spartan celebrates grit, teamwork, the burn that insists on one more hill. It does not ask who is coerced to make the hill available. Our admiration chooses from the story what flatters us and discards what binds us to responsibility. Even so, something genuinely instructive lives inside the legend. The hoplite phalanx is not only a weapon, it is a social principle. I stand fast, not because I am unafraid, but because you and I have arranged ourselves so that my fear is useful. The shield, heavy with bronze and promise, is both protection and demand. It guards more of my neighbor than of me. In that geometry, discipline means more than mere obedience. It means trust made muscle. It means a city that can ask of its citizens what it has promised to pay. A place in the line worth holding. Measured against Athens, Sparta looks narrow. There is no Aeschylus in Sparta, no Parthenon hovering like resolve turned to stone, no Socrates cross-examining the conscience of the city in the agora. Sparta's poets sang marching songs. Its architects valued right angles on the ground, not in the sky. Even its victories were often the kind we call negative, preventing novelty, stopping a neighbor's reach, keeping the old arrangement from sliding. And yet, Greek freedom, so often praised as if it were a single thing, survived in part because one city refused to be charming and learned instead to be dependable. Athens taught Greece to imagine. Sparta taught it to endure. Corinth taught it to balance accounts. The disciplined Sparta champion was not the brittle kind. Brittle discipline shatters under new stress. Spartan discipline, at its best, adjusted without dissolving. Its signature was steadiness with edges, lines held, steps counted, corrections made in low voices before cracks became breaks. That kind of discipline, stripped of cruelty and the machinery that maintained it over helot backs, is recognizable in settings far from a battlefield, in a crew that learns to move a ship as if a single body were handling the wind, in a firehouse that drills and drills until muscle memory is safety, in an operating room where economy of words is care, not contempt. The part worth admiring is not the appetite for hardship as spectacle, but the patience to make strength repeatable. The part worth questioning is older and remains the cost of a city that declares itself more important than the lives that compose it. Sparta's genius for turning boys into instruments required a thick cushion of unfreedom under them. It required women to pledge their sons to a code they did not make. It required the punishing of softness, even when softness would have been another name for mercy. When later ages take Spartan as praise, they sometimes mean clean lines and fewer luxuries, a tidy desk, and a budget without waste. They also sometimes mean the comfort of not having to think about who launders the uniform, who grows the grain, who cannot leave. And yet, the phrase "steel discipline" pulls at the imagination because it names a thing we need in any century: the ability to do what duty requires without noise, to endure discomfort without turning it into moral theater, to subordinate a little of the self so that the work becomes bigger than ego. In the barracks of modern armies, in the silent cadence of a pre-dawn run, in the short, necessary sentences of a cockpit crew, you can hear the descendant of the reed pipe that kept Nicky Andros's cohort in step, in the small pride a teammate takes in covering a gap. Without being asked, without being thanked, you can see the shadow of a bronze shield sliding into place over a neighbor's shoulder. We inherit Sparta most honestly when we admit both halves. The clean strength of people who train to be reliable together, and the unclean arrangements that made that training possible in its birthplace. Our age does not need the lash or the altar spectacle. It needs the steady drum that says, "Do it right again." It needs the brevity that keeps speech from wasting courage. It needs the habit of measuring success by the safety you afford the person next to you, not by the noise you make about your effort. Nicky Andros's city fell from command, then from wealth, then from the center of the map. But the idea he carried did not. It traveled without needing ships, lifted by admiration and argument, and the human hunger to be better at being together. Every time a coach tells a team that talent wins a game and discipline wins a season, something Spartan nods. Every time a medic practices a procedure in an empty room because the future might ask for it fast, something Spartan tightens a strap. Every time a community rebuilds after a storm with more order than anger, the old valley breathes through them. The image is durable, a line of men standing steady under weight. The space between them carefully small, the noise low, the promise simple. It is not the whole of a good society, but it is one tool good societies reach for when everything else becomes chatter. Long after the red cloaks faded and the helot fields were parceled differently, long after Thebes and Macedon and Rome rearranged the world, the lesson remained. That discipline, when it is not a costume for cruelty, can be a gentle iron, shaping effort into something that holds. So when we speak of steel discipline today, we are speaking partly of Sparta, of a city that chose a narrow road and walked it until even its enemies admitted the stride was impressive. We are also speaking of everyone since who learned to make a promise with a shield, I will cover you. Cover me. In that exchange, the past is not a museum. It is a muscle, still warm, still capable of work, reaching from a stone-floored yard beside a slow river into our rooms and routines, asking for nothing theatrical, only this. Keep the line. Keep time. Let your strength be quiet and shared. The morning came pale and metallic. The light like water poured over bronze. The field ahead was a low, tawny incline. Somewhere beyond it, Persian drums were already measuring out a confidence that had crossed seas. Nikiandros stood in the second rank, left arm threaded through the shield strap, right hand loose on the spear until the command made it firm. The rim of his neighbor's shield touched his own, the small, deliberate overlap that turned many men into one wall. Breath in, breath held, breath let out slow. Fear arrived on time, the way weather does. He let it stand beside him. He did not send it away. He felt the line come alive through his forearm, tiny adjustments passing from man to man as a message moves down a rope. The Enemotarch's voice sounded just above conversation. A single word, the one that turned boys into weight. Nikiandros thought of the river Eurotas and how it kept its course not by flash, but by insistence. He set his feet the way the Iran had taught him long ago, not too wide, never on his heels, ready to receive. Across the open ground, he could make out the glint of many points and the passengers of that glitter. Archers in tall caps, men behind wicker shields, cavalry with horses that carried their own kind of argument. The sound of their drums thickened. The field's grasses leaned in the breath that ran ahead of an army. A reed pipe behind the Spartan right began its small, anchoring song. 2 notes, then the third that bound them. The line breathed together. The first arrows came thin and high, a hiss before a patter. Shields, the command moved, not shouted, simply spoken with the certainty that obedience would arrive. Bronze lifted and turned the sky into a roof. The world shrank to what could be seen beneath the rim. Dust, the backs of ankles, the bright edge of a spear. Thuds found the shields, dull, then ringing, and Nikiandros felt his own rim shiver as if the bronze had a living flinch. A shaft glanced off and spun into the grass with a sound like a quick brushstroke. He kept his body where the training had put it. Fear named its price. He paid in stillness. Forward. The word was the turning of a key. The line stepped, one pace, then another, each landing a promise. Arrows thickened, then thinned. The angle had changed. The Persians would have to move. Nikiandros picked a patch of ground 10 paces ahead and walked into it as if it were a harbor he had been promised. He felt the prickling on the back of his neck. That meant a shaft had wanted him and failed. He did not look up. He kept his spear under hand, point level, breath on 2 beats in and 3 out, the measure his body trusted. The last arrows came flatter, petty, and spiteful. Then the enemy in front swelled, men pressing forward, wicker shields like doors held wrong, long spears and short, different lengths that turned timing into a puzzle. The phalanx's front rank lowered points. The second rank, Nikiandros's rank, set their spears above those, a hedge within a hedge. Contact was not a crash. It was a press, a pressure that grew until it owned the joints. The wicker shields absorbed, then folded. Men behind them jostled and tried to answer a question the line had already decided. Nikiandros's world became edge and weight. He drove his point forward and short, practiced bites, no lunge, never a lunge, and felt, through wood, the difference between missing and meeting. Sometimes the point found the rim of a shield and slid. Sometimes it found fabric that tightened and then gave. Once it found something that made a noise he did not name. He retracted, reset, gave the man in the first rank the room he needed to live. The push deepened. You could not see faces. You saw the work of necks and the anger of shoulders. The reed pipe's tune thinned and then appeared again, as if it had gone under and resurfaced. Fear worked in him like a second heart. It pumped when his own did. It asked him to take half a step back, just enough to have an easier breath, just enough to let the man to his right carry an extra sliver of weight. Honor, which had never spoken much, cleared its throat. If you go back, you make a gap. If you make a gap, you make a door. If you make a door, men enter. He stayed. A shudder passed down the line, the kind that begins as a rumor and, if untreated, becomes a truth. Somewhere on the left, a man had slipped in the loose soil. Somewhere on the right, a shield had bitten into a forearm and gone briefly slack. In the moment that followed, the Persians in front surged as if they had smelled luck. Nikiandros felt his neighbor on the left drive his heel deeper, felt the neighbor on the right shift weight, and missed the exact timing. A space opened like a mouth. It was not big. It did not need to be. He could have been cautious. The city rewarded caution that kept the line intact. He could have waited for the man behind him to step into the mouth. He could have shaved his risk and kept his life's edge smooth. Instead, something exact and private snapped into place. The memory of a small boy vomiting in a ravine after a night drill. The memory of his father's 2 fingers heavy on his shoulder. The Helot girl's jar born for 10 steps. The irons low again. And the elder's question, who is the bravest? And his own answer, the one who fears leaving a hole more than he fears death. He shifted his shield hand a finger's width, turned his body half a palm, and stepped into the mouth. Bronze kissed bronze. The rim of his shield slid over the neighbor's, covering more than it should, asking his forearm to be more than it was. His spear came up, then down, then forward, the motion that saves breath and spends it on purpose. Something hard struck his helmet and rang the way a bell does when a festival starts. He saw sparks under his eyelids and tasted coin. For a beat, he could not feel his fingers. Panic took a step toward him. He let it get close enough to see its face and then told it where to stand. The mouth closed. The line, feeling itself whole again, exhaled. The push resumed. The men in front of them, brave and many and unaccustomed to this stubborn grammar, wavered and then tried a different tactic. Reach past, grab, pull, make mess. Hands found the rim of his shield. A tug tried to unwrite his promise. He let the tug work for him, stepped just enough, twisted from the hips the way the old soldier had taught him by the river, and the hand went away. He did not follow. He held. The pipers on the right found a louder breath. The drum within the Persian ranks changed its mind. On a far edge of vision, a cavalry knot formed as if it were considering whether to tangle itself in bronze and oak. The frontmost men in the enemy ground began to look to their own shoulders rather than at the points in front of them. The wicker shields, so light at the beginning, had become nets. They caught fear and showed it to the men behind. Nikiandros felt the change before he saw it. The line's pressure shifted from surviving to moving. The command that carried was the one that allowed breath to lengthen by half. The ground underfoot, churned by many, accepted him a little more easily. He did not celebrate. He did not think of victory. He thought of the rule that all good habits share. Finish the motion you began. They advanced through the space the enemy had just occupied. Distances changed. Sounds took their time returning. A banner with bright tassels sagged and then disappeared, as if someone had mistranslated wind. The phalanx did not break ranks to chase. It kept time. It stepped until the captain's hands came up, and the reef of men slowed and stopped with that improbable exactness you only get from long practice and shared fear. Silence did not fall. It arrived in shreds between the last clatter and the first counting. The air smelled of hot bronze and trampled grass, and the tired sweetness that follows great effort. Nikiandros stood with his shield at an angle that let his arm breathe and his promise remain visible. He looked down and saw the small chip on the rim that would be tonight's story if tonight allowed stories. He looked left and right and found the faces he knew without seeing. Someone laughed once, like a bark that surprised its owner. He had not died. He had not stepped back. He had stepped into a mouth and made of himself a tooth. His fear had not gone. It had been braided into something useful. The pride that came was not loud. It was alignment, bone with oath, breath with measure. He understood, more deeply than in any mess hall lesson, the sentence older men had said until it had almost become decoration. The shield is heavier with duty than with bronze. He felt the extra weight and did not resent it. The captains began to speak in the voices of men who do not like to waste daylight. There would be the careful work now, the counted, the tended, the pursuers checked by hands that remembered what happens when victory turns to appetite. Nikiandros took one longer breath than the line required, then cut it to proper size. In the crown of his helmet, where the earlier blow had rung, a warmth remained, steady as a small lamp. He would carry it to evening. He would sleep when the city allowed it. He would wake, and his arm would know again the place where bronze becomes vow. Honor had cost him more than an easy life. In the moment when survival had offered itself, quick and reasonable, he had chosen the heavier promise. He did not make a speech to himself. He stood in the line, quiet, exact, part of the long thought Greece would later call by many names. Courage, discipline, the art of holding when holding is the whole art. They held the field, not cleanly, not without the ledger marking its due, but they held it. By midday, the wind had changed and carried the smell of hot bronze away. What remained was dust, trampled grass, and the ordinary work that follows extraordinary strain. Captains moved along the ranks, counting aloud with the steadiness of men who refused to let grief write the totals. Names answered, names did not. Where the line had flexed, a gap of flattened stalks showed how close the day had come to another ending. Nikiandros stood with his shield resting edge down, the strap slack on his forearm. His ears rang in a small circle from the blow he had taken, but the world had reassembled its distances. He recognized the low humor in the mess of wounded, how men joked to keep the door shut against the wrong kind of silence, and he recognized the hush, where a cloak had been pulled over a face, and the feet beneath it still pointed neatly forward. He helped lift two injured men to the shade of a banner pole and poured water without asking if they were thirsty. One of them gripped his wrist hard and then let go. They did not speak. Victory was not a shout here. It was the permission to work in order. Armor was unbuckled with the same economy with which it had been set. Spears checked and repointed, leather straps mended with quick, ugly stitches. A trophy would be raised where the enemy had broken, spears lashed into a cross, Shields hung so that the wind could tell the story for a while after men had gone. The Persians had not been routed so much as convinced. Their dead lay, with their wicker shields skewed at unhappy angles, their bright caps dulled by dust. A few prisoners sat with their hands bound in front, looking everywhere but at the faces that had driven them back. Losses were neither hidden nor polished. The mess counted bowls and knew which hands would not be there to pass them. A boy, no, not a boy, a young man, with down still on his cheeks, asked where Menon was, and someone put a hand on his shoulder and turned him gently toward the shade where such questions ended. It was the sort of touch Sparta allowed itself, not comfort as softness, but guidance as duty. The songs that rose in late afternoon were not hymns to triumph. They were meter that kept the chest from breaking. For Nikiandros, the change came without ceremony. He felt it as a new balance point inside. The place where fear had once sat now taken by something heavier and steadier. He had stepped into a space that would have widened without him, and the line had held. The sensation was not elation, it was fit. In the press, he had discovered the exact size of his courage, and it was enough. Later, when he bent to wash his face in a basin, and the water jumped from the drops falling from his chin, he noticed his reflection and did not search for the boy there. The boy had already moved out. The man did not need to introduce himself. His father found him at dusk with the restraint that had always been their family's chosen language. He looked Nikiandros up and down, the scrape on the helmet's crown, the chip in the shield's rim, the way the spear sat easy in his hand even when he thought no one was watching. He did not say, "I am proud." He said, "Your line speaks well of you." In Sparta, that was the same sentence. The city absorbed the battle into its longer story quickly, as it always did. News traveled down the Peloponnesian roads the way a cool draft slides through a doorway. Allies repeated the account with a little more shine each time. Enemies repeated it with an edge of warning. The Persians would not vanish because of one day's lesson, but men far away who had never seen the Eurotas would now picture Spartans differently when they heard the name, not as statues, not as boasts, but as a wall that did not panic. The myth of invincibility took no oaths. It worked more subtly, seeping into the minds of friend and foe alike. "They do not break," people said, and that sentence, once planted, spared Sparta as many fights as it invited. Myths simplify, and in that simplification, they do their harm. Spartans knew their own margins too well to believe the lie outright. They counted lost friends. They felt the ache in wrists and the sleep that came in a heavy fall and the startled waking in the night when the helmet's ringing returned. They remembered moments when the ground tried to steal a foot, when a mouth opened in the line and a man like Nikiandros had to become its tooth. They accepted that invincibility is a story other people tell about you and, if you're not careful, tell you about yourself. Still, a city uses the tools available. The trophy on the ridge said as much to the valley as to the gods. Here, the line did not move backward. Boys of the agoge would be taken to see it. An Irene would ask a question in a mild tone. "Where should your shield be?" And the boys would all look to the left. Merchants in Corinth would remind each other that overland was safer than the sea for a season. In Athens, a speaker would use the day's news as a spur for shipbuilding or a moral for a new decree. In Persia, a commander would add one more note to a scroll. These men who fight in bronze, they keep time. When camp settled and fires began to put their quiet smoke into the evening, Nikiandros sat with his mess and ate the same food he had eaten since he could remember, a broth without pretense, bread that argued a little with the teeth. Laughter found them in short pieces. Someone tried to praise him, and he shook his head once, the laconic refusal that says, "The line did that. I only stood where I was placed." Pride in Sparta did not grow in the chest like a blaze. It banked, kept warm under ash, ready to light where needed and not otherwise. The historical consequence would outlive the men who had bought it. Chroniclers would turn the day into comparisons and clean arcs. Plutarch, long after, would give it a moral and a polish. But in the span that mattered, to a city trying to keep its borders, to allies deciding whether to cast their lot, to enemies deciding whether to test their luck, this victory reinforced the pattern. The Spartan phalanx, heavy with duty, could be trusted to act like itself. That trust, multiplied over years, became the aura people called invincibility. It was never quite true. It was often true enough. As the stars lifted into their careful places and the mountain sent its colder breath down into the plain, Nikiandros set his shield where it would not fall in the night and lay back on a ground that knew thousands of such backs. He felt the ache settle in proper joints. He held, for a moment, the knowledge that the boy who had once halved a turnip in secret had learned to spend himself in the open without noise. The city had got what it wanted, a man in the line. He had kept what he needed, a small, chosen measure of himself inside the bronze and oath. The battle was over. The work was not. The myth was growing somewhere in the dark, tended by mouths. He did not mind. Myths walk ahead or behind. He would be where feet meet earth, where duty makes rhythm, where a man stands and the line speaks. Greatness, in Sparta's tongue, was not a shining crown, but a weathered tool. It was not a poem, not a statue, not even the name carved on a stone. It was a line that did not break, a promise a shield could keep. And beneath that steadiness ran a hard truth. In this valley, cruelty was not a flaw in the design. It was part of the blueprint. A boy's hunger was a lesson. A lash was punctuation. The weight on a forearm was a vow and a vice. What grew from those pressures was real, a discipline that could be counted on, a courage that arrived when summoned. But so was the cost. Some of it was paid openly in bruises and cold. Some of it was paid quietly by those who worked the fields and were told their lives belonged elsewhere. The city made a kind of iron from people. Iron holds. Iron also forgets how to bend. Perhaps every greatness knows this bargain. Rome paid with conquest. Athens paid with its pride and its brilliant quarrels. Sparta paid with a narrowly made life and a broad shadow cast over others. The question that remains, calm and patient as the Eurotas sliding under starlight, is whether the making justifies the method, whether a virtue hammered on someone else's back keeps its shine when the hammer rests. Still, the human wish inside it is familiar. To stand when standing is hard, to be known for reliability rather than display, to contribute something that lasts beyond a single heartbeat. We praise what holds because we fear what slips. We praise what is simple because we know how easily we complicate ourselves. The Spartans turned that praise into policy. They tied their children to it, and their history learned to walk in step. Now the battlefield empties of heat and noise. The day's clamor has fallen apart into its smaller pieces. Metal set down, leather unbuckled, breath laid back into its proper length. Moonlight climbs the ridges of Tagetus and spills over the valley like cool milk. You can see the shine it lays on the river, the neat silver stitched through olive trees, the soft polish it gives to everything that refuses to shout. Helmets lie where men have left them, their crests dark against pale grass. A few have rolled a little and come to rest against stones, like closed questions. There is a particular silence that follows when duty has been spent with precision. It is not emptiness, it is a full bowl no longer sloshing. In that silence, small sounds return to their own size. The crack of a twig underfoot, the low murmur of comrades, the distant reed pipe testing a tune. The wind from the mountain has no hurry. It threads through the straps of a discarded shield, lifts a corner of a cloak, cools the last hot places on a spear point. The land absorbs what it can. The rest rises and thins into the night. If cruelty was the city's method, craft was its faith. It believed a life could be shaped as carefully as a spear shaft, sanded of knots and taught to fly in a straight sentence. In the best of its work, the shaping did not merely produce hardness, it produced accuracy, and there is a gentleness in things that fit exactly. A phalanx, well kept, is a kindness to its own members. Each man knows where his edge ends and another's begins. Each man knows what will be expected and when. Chaos is its own cruelty. Order, when it is honest, is a mercy. But no order cancels mortality. The moon makes a fact of that as clearly as any philosopher. It paints the helmets as if they were old coins, and it makes the olive leaves pale on one side and dark on the other. The same light slid over the heads of men who fought here 100 years earlier and will slide over stones 100 years from now when there are no Spartans to lean their shields on them. People want two things, everywhere and always, to keep living and to be remembered. The first is a negotiation with the body. The second is a negotiation with time. Sparta wagered that if its sons learned to hold together, the second wish might be granted even when the first failed. Nikiandros would not have put it that way. He would have said, "The line held because we held it." Yet what he and his city practiced night after night, year after year, leans into the same old desire that moves stonemasons and sailors and surgeons and firefighters and friends. A desire to leave behind something steadier than one person's breath. A wall that keeps wind off others. A ship you can trust in weather. A habit that makes the worst day survivable. A sentence that can be read long after the voice that spoke it has gone quiet. Look at the field the moon has made simple. The ridges wear a silver edge. The river writes its narrow script and will do so tomorrow. It will do so when names have become stories, and stories have become a few lines in a book, and the book has lain closed for decades before someone opens it and finds there, without drama, the same old lessons. Do not overreach when you are tired. Check your neighbor's footing. Make your courage quiet and therefore credible. These are not uniquely Spartan teachings, but they are Spartan in their refusal to apologize for being plain. The helmets, some upright, some on their sides, are punctuation marks in the grass. A period where a life ended. A comma where a man paused and will return. The moon does not care which is which, but people do. And that caring is part of what makes us reach for discipline, to be able to deliver on what we have promised to others, to ourselves, to the larger thing we have decided we belong to. The city asked for that promise and wrote it into boys' bones. The danger was not the asking. The danger was forgetting that those bones were attached to lives that could be softened without being spoiled, that could be firm without being cruel. The valley breathes. The olive groves shift, leaf on leaf, like quiet applause. The mountains keep their posture. Somewhere, a dog barks once and stops, as if reminded of the hour. Fires in camp have found their correct size. Conversations taper into fragments and then into companionship that does not need words. It is a good hour for memory, no longer inflamed, not yet cooled to ash. In that hour, Sparta looks less like a legend and more like a careful, severe answer to a question every community faces. How do we keep faith with each other when fear is near? In a softer age, we pick and choose from that answer. We keep the training and ditch the lash. We keep the trust that grows from repetition and discard the contempt for softness. We let women speak the hard lines and also the forgiving ones. We honor the one who stands steady and also the one who knows when to bend so the line does not snap. We remember the helots, the hands that paid what the citizens could not afford to count. And we say the quiet part aloud. Real discipline has beneficiaries beyond the people who practice it. If it harms those who never consented, it is just domination in uniform. The moon climbs, patient as law. The river keeps its cold music. A pair of helmets sit together as if listening. In the hush that deepens, another layer of understanding arrives, not with words, but with a feeling in the chest. That endurance is not a performance. It is a conversation between breath and purpose. That courage to last prefers company. That honor is a light best carried low, where it illuminates the ground rather than blinds the eyes. The boy who once lay on reeds and counted breaths has become a man whose breaths count for others. He will wake when the city wakes. He will drill because the body forgets without practice. He will correct a younger hand without humiliation because he remembers how small mercies fitted into the seams of a hard day can leave a shape more humane. He will stand in the line and the line will speak, and in that speaking there will be something older than the valley, the human wish to be part of a structure that steadies more than it harms. The Peloponnese does what it has always done. It receives the night and returns it softer. Moonlight finds the road north, the road south, the shards of pottery by a doorway, the rough weave of a cloak hung to air. It touches a shield rim and shows the small notch that will need polishing. It makes a silver path across a puddle that was only mud at noon. It lowers itself onto the plain where men worked and worried and sang and argued and went quiet. It does not argue back. It blesses by observation. There is a kind of peace that comes not from forgetting the day, but from having used it well. Sparta taught that peace with harsh tools. We can learn it with gentler ones. The shape is the same. Take the hard thing and make it repeatable. Take the fear and give it a task. Take the promise and keep it where others can lean. When the world grows loud and thin, this old valley still offers a slower measure. The measured step, the held line, the calm after strain. Not the sleep of those who collapse, but the rest of those who have set their burdens down in order and know where to find them in the morning. Night has its own discipline. It widens the distances without breaking the bonds. Mountains, river, groves, the hush over a field of laid-down helmets. The order they keep is gentle and exact. Within that order, a person can feel their effort ease back to a human scale. Breath returns to its rightful size. Time hums at the edges without hurry. And somewhere, faint but present, is the memory of a reed pipe. 2 notes, then the third that ties them. The song of work well done, of courage used sparingly and well, of a promise kept until light. Begin where the road first bent. A doorway, a mother's breath held tight, a small hand pulled forward by a city that did not ask, only arranged. A boy of 7, knees too sharp for pride, crosses a threshold and learns the first meaning of scarcity. Fewer words, fewer comforts, fewer choices. The reeds he cuts for a bed nick his fingers. Hunger becomes a tutor with perfect memory. Somewhere, an older youth says his name the way a craftsman names wood, testing the grain, judging what it will take to shape. Now hold that image beside its echo years later. The same body, lengthened and weighted, standing in a line that moves as one long thought. The shield's rim has made a home on his forearm. The spear knows the path from hip to point without asking the mind for permission. Between the boy and the man lies a road paved with small obediences, small defiances, and 1,000 corrections offered without drama. Between the two lies a city that built itself from scarcity into steadiness and asked its sons to be the bricks that did not crack. The distance between helplessness and grandeur is not as wide as it looks. The child's open, frightened eyes and the soldier's narrowed, disciplined gaze are entries in the same ledger, debts paid in different coin. One is drafted by love and fear. The other volunteers to keep faith with the men on either side. The cloak that scratched a boy's neck becomes the color the world uses to name a certain kind of resolve. The reed pipe that once set his feet to the training measure becomes the tether that keeps courage from sprinting into waste. He is no longer a boy. He is not merely a warrior. He is the shape a hard place made, and he is the few private mercies he managed to protect inside that shape. Sparta speaks then, not in monuments, but in habits. Keep the line, finish the motion, share the weight. The city learned to say these things so quietly that the hills themselves seem to remember the syllables. It is right to mark the cost, to name the backs that bent under grain, the lash disguised as lesson, the tenderness that had to smuggle itself into the day. It is also right to admit what was made, a discipline that could be borrowed by gentler hands, a steadiness we still try to teach without inheriting the cruelty that first carried it. Sparta is gone, but its shadow still lies across our idea of strength. We feel it when a team holds firm in the late minutes and does not lunge for glory it has not earned. We hear it in the clipped sentences that guide a delicate task safely to its end. We see it in the way a person places their courage where it will cover a neighbor rather than their own pride. The shadow is cooler now, stripped of much that made it fearsome, but it still marks a contour we recognize, strength as a quiet shared promise. So let us return the boy to his doorway, just for a breath, and wish him what his city could not name, that even as he is made into a necessary part, some small human remainder will persist. Let us return the man to his place in the line and honor the plainness of his oath, the way he stepped into a gap and made of himself a bridge no one applauded. Let us set the helmet gently where the moon can find it, and let the river take the day's heat out of the earth. The mountains keep their posture. The olive leaves turn one silver cheek to the night. A reed pipe tests 2 notes, then the third that ties them. It is enough. We close the gate of this valley without locking it. The road out is the same road in, only walked with quieter feet. Take with you what is worth carrying: the steadiness, the craft, the preference for promises kept over speeches made. Leave behind what the age no longer needs: the lash, the narrowing that mistakes hardness for virtue. The epic steps back into its own light. The field empties. The stars do their careful work. And somewhere in that clean, unhurried dark, a mother exhales, a soldier rests his shield, and the idea of strength, less cruel now, no less firm, finds a place beside us, simple as breath, enduring as stone.